so thankful because he is a wonderful man, and I'm excited to hear more of his story. Without further ado, Slavko, if you could come up, if we can give him a hand.
Thank you, Callum.
Thank you. Well, do take a seat. Slavko, amazing to have you here. You are the first Mafia member that I've ever, or former Mafia member I've ever met, I have to say. Did you kind of, as a small child, think, I know what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be involved in the Mafia? Is that...
Well, not actually, and it was never on my radar. As a child, I was born in former Yugoslavia. Former Yugoslavia was a communist country. Police was strong and strict, and there was no such thing as organized crime. And that's where I grew up. Also, I'm not coming from criminal background family. It's actually other way around. My grandfather was judge, and my father was prosecutor at the court.
Okay.
I haven't met my grandfather. He died when my father was very, very small. My father was only 7, 8 years old when he lost his father. And then I was only 7, 8 years old when I lost my father. So my father also died very young. So I hardly remember him. My mother, she was, most of her life, she was director of city bakery. And then last few years before retirement, she was director of city hotel. I had pretty normal childhood, and I would say that I was raised up with high moral standards in my life.
And now your parents are different nationalities, and that's important, isn't it?
Yes, yes, that is very important in my life story. Back then, when I was born, it was not important. In former Yugoslavia now, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you probably know that former Yugoslavia had few bad wars in 1990s, and now is split in 6, 7 countries. I lose track. We are all the time splitting, so it's more and more, it looks to me. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, where I live today, there are 3 major nationalities. So one is Serb, which is by religious background Orthodox. The other is Croat, which would be Catholic. And third group would be, and actually largest, so maybe first, Bosniak, which would be Muslim. And in former Yugoslavia during the communism, it was encouraged by government and, you know, to erase all that national differences. So basically even, how to say, not international, but marriages between different groups.
Integrated.
Yeah, were encouraged. So my father was Serb and my mother was Croat. And both of them were communists and atheists, as most of the people in my childhood in former Yugoslavia were.
Okay, okay. So you had a good childhood.
Yes, yes. I have a sister 7 years older than me. We had sometimes hard times, sometimes good times. I grew up mainly without father. As I said, I was very young when he died, but my mother was taking good care of sister and me.
Okay, so if your plan wasn't then to get involved in the Mafia from the beginning, kind of what was the plan?
What was my plan? Do you want to hear first one when I was very little?
Sure.
Well, my mother was, as I said, the director of city bakery.
Yeah.
And I loved pretzels. You know, that's how you call them, pretzels.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and my dream was when I grow up, I will sell pretzels. I thought then I will have access, you know, and I like them. Later, when I grew up a little bit, I had interest in mechanical engineering, electricity, and as a child, I broke many things. I would take screwdriver, open them, and never be able to put them back together. So I wanted to learn how to put them back together. And actually, in high school, I was in school for electrotechnicians, and then I was studying mechanical engineering.
Okay, okay. And you joined the army in high school, is that right?
Yes, after the high school. First, when I was only 17, I joined Communist Party. So both my parents were communists. That's how I was raised up. And it was a little bit unusual because usually you had to be 18 to become member of Communist Party. You could be a member of Communist Youth before that.
Right.
But when I was 17, I was still in high school.
Okay.
I first became member of Communist Party. Then when I was 18, I went to army. And I spent 1 year in the school for reserved officers. And probably because I was also a member of party helped that. So I left army with a rank in army.
Okay. So seem like you're quite successful in whatever you did. You're studying engineering, got officer rank in army. Where does getting involved in organized crime come into this?
Well, when I started university, I had a good plan for my life. And as I said, my interest was in mechanical engineering. I loved ships, boats. I was in the Navy when I was in Army, but also I loved airplanes. And in my hometown, which is Mostar, in former Yugoslavia, town well known by old bridge, 500 years old, was a military factory for airplanes. And that was like what I was studying, mechanical engineering for airplanes. And I was thinking, few years, then I will get degree, and that will mean I will get good job, and that means good salary, and I'll have a girlfriend and get married, and life will be good. So that was
happily
my plan.
Ever after.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then I thought that suddenly I found shortcut to that plan, and that I don't have to wait for years.
Gotcha.
So how I got involved with organized crime. Some of my friends from high school, they started to work for one organization. And in former Yugoslavia, there was no organized crime. Then democracy came after death of President Tito. In the 1980s, late 1980s, democracy came. And democracy brought some good things, but also it opened doors for some bad things. So one of the bad things which democracy opened door for was organized crime.
Okay.
And there was a man, he was by background from former Yugoslavia, from Montenegro, now another republic,
Yep.
splitted, from Montenegro, and he was involved with different illegal things. He had to run from police, and he ended up in France. His name was George, but when he ended up in France, he changed his name to Georges, I guess, to sound more French.
Much different, yeah.
And he was developing his business there, and he got involved with gambling.
Okay.
So he had, by the time when he returned to Yugoslavia after the fall of communism, he had casinos in France, in Czech Republic, and on north of Africa. And with fail of communism, he saw opportunity to expand his business, and he knew people already, knew language, had connections. So first casino was open in my town, and some of my friends from the high school started to work there. And then they came to me, and they offered me a job. Casino was looking for workers. So they said, hey, there is job opportunity. Do you want to work? I said, no, not really. I want to study. I have plan, to finish faculty, and I'm not interested for work at this moment. So then they asked, do you want to hear how salary is big? How big salary is?
Yeah.
I said, well, you can tell me, but that will not change my mind.
Yeah.
After they told me, I suddenly changed my mind. My first salary in casino was several times higher than salary of my mother, who was at that time director of city hotel. And also I was thinking that I'm smart enough to start to work and continue study, which later proved that I was wrong.
Okay.
So I dropped study pretty soon.
Okay. So full-time at the casino.
Say again?
Full-time at the casino.
Yes, I was working full-time at the casino, and in the beginning when I accepted that offer and accepted job, as I said, I was raised with high moral standards. And I don't think that I would accept something what I would think that is immoral or bad, but I was not seeing anything wrong with that work. I was thinking that casino is like amusement park for adults. You know, when you have kids, you take them to merry-go-round. When you have
Sure.
adults, you take them to
Casino, yeah.
And anyway, no one is forcing people to go, so it's not drug dealing, it's not trafficking. People come by their own will, they have some fun, spend some money, and that's it.
Sure.
But I didn't know actually how addictive gambling is and how addictive it can be. And that is one big lie, that casino or gambling is amusement for adults. Yeah, on Sunday when I left this church building, I just walk across the street and there is one space with gambling machines, and actually on the window it says amusements.
Yeah.
And it's not true. It's very, very serious addiction, and I saw many lives destroyed because of gambling. But I was somehow slowly drawn in. So, you know, when I started, I didn't see anything wrong with it.
Sure.
And then, like with frog, if you take frog and put it in hot water, she will jump out. But if you put in cold water and then warm it up more and more and more, it will get cooked without knowing it. So I got cooked in casino.
Cooked in the casino. And cooking the books, I would imagine, as well. Is that
Cooking
the books?
The books, yeah. That was one of the first things, actually, how illegal activities started. The George, who was the owner, wanted biggest part of profit for himself. And the policy of our organization was that we do not own spaces. So we would make contract with either hotel or restaurant or some public space, and we would use their space, and we would bring our equipment and workers. And contract was always to share profit half-half, 50-50.
Okay.
So George wanted bigger part of money for himself, and he taught us how to cheat partners, how to make double books, to make him more money. And we were doing that, but then, you know, we realized at some moment why to take just for George. There is opportunity to take for ourselves.
Right.
And big money was in game. In organization, there were maybe, when we grew, we started smaller, but maybe 50 people. And sometimes monthly profit would be up to $1 million. So there was big money.
Yeah.
And everyone was stealing from everyone. George realized what's going on, so he then wanted to protect himself.
Sure.
And he appointed some people as what we called back then inspectors of income. So I was one of them, and I was inspecting, is that English word?
Yeah.
Inspecting,
yeah.
Money for George, which made me more opportunity to take more for myself.
Yeah.
Because now anyone who wanted to steal from him had to give share to me.
Yeah.
And so I was over 3 casinos, and I was supposed boss over 3 casinos. I was only 20 years old, and I was in charge to make sure that everything runs smoothly, if there is any problem to solve it, and to make sure that George gets most of the money.
So you're 20 years old.
Yes.
You're in charge of 3 casinos,
yes.
inspecting the money.
Yeah.
And did your parents know what you were doing? Or?
Well, my father died when I was young.
Right.
I was 7, 8 years old. I hardly remember him. My mother knew that I'm working in casino, but she didn't know about all things that I'm involved with. Actually, it was not dangerous for me or for any of us, because we had employed bouncers who were taking care of any problem. Besides stealing money from partners, giving to George, stealing from him, also often casino workers would give loans to people who gamble. So someone comes to gamble, he loses everything. He wants to dig himself out of the pit, and, you know, asks for loan. Then he gets loan with very high interest to pay in a day or two. And but we had big bouncers which were taking care of that.
I mean, you don't look like you need a bouncer, particularly Slavko. Yeah.
You know, I invest years in this, so I was skinny boy back then. I was not. I had probably some 40 kilos less than now.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got this shortcut to success in a way, or to getting to that dream you had when you were in high school. I don't know. Was it what you were looking for? Is it?
Well, in the sense, I had everything. So I was young, I was healthy, I had so-called friends. I thought back then that I have friends. I had a lot of money, and when money was gone, most of that people were gone as well. So I realized later that they were friends to my money,
Right.
or George's money. It was not mine.
Yeah.
And also, you know, when you have money and when you have position, when you are boss in casino, when you are then you have certain power and even respect. Today, when I'm looking back, I'm pretty sure that many people didn't really like me behind my back, but in front of me, everyone was nice to me. So I didn't have any problems in my life, but also when I look back today, I can see that there was some emptiness in my heart, and that there was something missing.
Okay. And when you, say, were off from work, say at home and things, were you ever kind of in fear of one of your colleagues kind of, hey, you stole money from me? Or you ever in fear of George or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I met George. George never came to my hometown. When all started, I'm not sure, I think that he still couldn't come because of the problems with the police at the very beginning. So he had his people who started business. I had boss over me, and then there was boss over him in my hometown. And then we started to open casinos in other towns in former Yugoslavia, and I met George only once, and that was in Belgrade, capital of former Yugoslavia, when we were opening casino in Hotel Intercontinental. That was at that time biggest casino in former Yugoslavia. A lot of money was invested. He even brought 2 London taxis. You know, we don't have that cars. We didn't have them. So he bought 2 that cars, London taxis, and just to take people who come by airplane, you know, to gamble in casino, to take them back and forth.
As
so
you
I
do.
met him.
As you do, yeah.
Yeah,
Why not? Yeah.
So I met him only once. I was not in fear of him. I was once in a problem with one bouncer. We were cutting him for share. We were not giving him enough money. For quite a long time, he was not aware of that, but then he realized, and he cornered me in corridor and grabbed me for my neck and started to choke me. And at that time, I was carrying gun with me. Even I didn't need it till that moment. So I pulled the gun and put on his ribs, and he let me go. So there were not many situations like that, but
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So it is a bit like The Godfather then.
I would not call it that way.
Okay. Okay. And now you're married, and when did you meet her? Is it somewhere while you're in casinos and everything?
Yeah, we started to date when I was working in casino. I'm married now for 24 years. I know I got married when I was 10.
Yeah.
I look young, don't I?
As you say, Slavko, as you say. Yeah.
Actually, we met through my wife's brother, and he was my friend in high school. I met him in high school when I was first grade of high school, and through him I met her. So I knew her for quite a few years, and we were friends, but there was no chemistry between us, can you say that way?
Yeah.
At that time. And then I went to army, and then we started to exchange letters a little bit, and then I came back, then I started to work in casino, and then some chemistry started among us. So I asked her to date me, but there were 2 things which were bothering me. So Sanja, my wife, she was coming from a religious background, which for former Yugoslavia during communism was pretty unusual. Even communism in former Yugoslavia was mildest probably from all Eastern Europe, and it was not forbidden to be religious, but if you are religious, you didn't have many advantages in life. So her father, he earned pension as a worker, and he was very smart, and probably if he was in Communist Party, he would advance, you know, at his workplace, have higher salary, but because he was religious, he couldn't be in Communist Party, which means no advance, small salary, so not many people, religious people.
Okay.
And then after the fall of communism, it even became a little bit popular to be religious and to wear religious symbols.
Okay.
So since my wife was coming from a religious family, she would occasionally go to church, and she was wearing little crosses on her earrings.
Okay.
And I told her back then when I asked her to date me, I said, you know, listen, I like you, I think that it can be something in between us. And I said, but there are two things which bothers me. I said, first, if you want to date me, you have to stop to go to church. And second, you have to stop to wear crosses.
Okay.
And she liked me, and it was not that she really believed, but it was more tradition of her family.
Right.
So she did. She stopped to go to church, stopped to wear crosses, and we started to date.
Okay.
I was working in casino then, and she was studying.
Good. Good to start with the positive note for you guys out there. But yeah, start with the positive. If you like her, then the request. Yes. Yes. Okay.
If there are single guys, feel free to take notes. Can give you a few more tips after.
So you're working in the casinos. You're involved in the mafia. You're cooking the books a bit. You've got a girlfriend, and 1991 kind of comes, and some war clouds start gathering. What happened then? What was that?
Well, it was actually 1990 when war started in former Yugoslavia. First, it started all the way west in Slovenia. And that was pretty short. It was somehow, at least for me, unexpected. And it didn't last long. And there were not many casualties. There were not a lot of fights. Slovenia got independence. But then 1991, war moved to Croatia. And that was much more severe war with many casualties, many destroyed towns, many refugees. And since I had rank from army and I was a reserved officer, former Yugoslav army started to try to recruit me. And I had a big dilemma and big problem because war was at the beginning between Serbs and Croats. And my father was Serb, my mother was Croat. So if I joined former Yugoslav army, I had to fight against my mother, half of my family, and half of myself. In the beginning, I said to my mom, you know, just don't take any invitation for the army, because how it worked, in the beginning, army would send invitation letter. And when postman would bring that, and if you sign that you received that invitation, you have to go there. If you don't come, they look after you, put you on court. But if you don't sign, if you don't receive, you know, you are fine. And that invitations were always in blue envelopes. Blue is official envelope, and if you receive blue envelope, it means either it's court or army. So I said to my mom, if postman brings blue envelope, don't sign anything. Tell him I'm not here, and that worked for some time. But then many people actually were doing that to avoid war.
Sounds like a good plan.
And then the army started to send actually soldiers. And soldier would come with a gun, with invitation, and they had more strict orders to bring people. But I said same to my mom, and then one day someone was ringing on the door, and I opened the door, and there was a soldier outside. So I was caught by surprise. Then he said, does Slavko Hadžić lives here? I said, yes. And he said, is he at home? I said, no, sorry, he is gone. He is traveling. He asked, who are you? I said, I'm neighbor. I came for a coffee. So he left, and I stayed safe. So I managed through war in Croatia not to join army. But then as war in Croatia was developing and extending, tensions between nationalities started to raise in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And one day, big explosion happened. So there were army barracks of former Yugoslav army in the town, and former Yugoslav army officially was in Bosnia. But then Croatian paramilitaries started together in towns, around towns. And one day, it was April 1992, someone parked huge truck filled with explosive right next to the army barracks and detonated, either by timer or by time device. And it was huge explosion, and windows in half of the city were broken, and that was beginning of the war in my city. Now, Croatian paramilitaries were already in some parts of the town, and actually in the part of the town where I lived, they came, and now they wanted to recruit me. And my mother was Croat, but now if I joined them, I had to fight against the other half of family.
Right.
And I was really confused, didn't know what to do. I left my home apartment where I lived with my mother because they knew where I'm living and they were coming to pick me up. So I went to stay with the friends where they didn't know where I am. And after that was all in just 2-3 days. You know, I woke up in the morning and was thinking, should I go to casino or not? Already shooting started in town. So I called, landlines still worked. I called number of casino, and some unknown voice picked up the phone, and casino was in one hotel, that like main office.
Right.
And I asked, who is that? He said, whom you are looking for? I said, for casino, I work there. He said, no more casino, no more hotel. Army overtook those premises now, so don't call, don't come. And I was very confused. I didn't know what to do, and it was first time in my life, actually, that I had problem which I couldn't solve. In the past, there were not many problems, but I would solve it either by force, either by money, or by connections. But now none of that could help me.
Wow. Well, so what happens? Get war all around you, and
well, I was walking with my girlfriend, with Sanja, through town. We went to visit a sister of my grandmother. She was in her 90s. Actually, she was exactly 92 back then. And we went to see how she is doing and if she needs anything. And we were walking back to the place where we were sleeping at the friend. And we were walking by one church building. In communism in Yugoslavia, church buildings were not destroyed. They were standing, all religious objects. Some maybe were destroyed if something had to be built at that place, but most were not. And they were mainly empty. But we were walking by one church building, and Sanja asked me, she said, would you mind if I go in and pray for us? And to her surprise, later when I spoke with her, she said she was sure that I will reject that offer. But in that moment, I guess I was so desperate, I said, sure, I'll wait you here, go in and do whatever you want. So she walked into that church. I stayed outside a little bit, and then I walked after her, and there were big gates, door. I walked through that door. Church was empty. I saw her somewhere on the right in the corner, and I just stood behind that door, and I closed my eyes and prayed first time in my life. It was short and simple prayer. I remember every word. I said, God, if you exist, please help me now and show me what to do. And I opened my eyes, and nothing happened. There was no fireworks, no angels, no trumpets. I was pretty disappointed and felt silly. I just walked outside, and when she came out, I didn't mention to her that I was praying. But actually that night, somehow I had peace, and I made decision to leave town, to leave country, and that I will not stay, that war is not mine. And so we did. We sit, some parts of the story. I had car, but there was no petrol. I ran out of petrol in that few days, and petrol stations didn't work, and so I had car, I didn't have petrol. So father of my friend from casino, actually the one who offered me work, and later I became his best man, his father, I called his father, and he gave me petrol from his car that I can leave town. And then as we were leaving, there were, how you say when there is like block on the road?
Blockade.
Blockade.
Yeah.
There were people with the guns, they blocked the road, and you know, they didn't let people to go through and checking documents. And so as I was approaching that blockade, I had gun under the seat, and I was thinking, should I take gun or not? And I was looking, and then I recognized some of the faces, and some of that guys would come to casino and gamble, and I knew them.
Wow.
So when they saw me, they just waved that we can go through.
Wow.
So yeah, that's how we left town.
Wow. And to Cyprus, is that right?
Well, first we ended up in Serbia.
Okay.
And again, looking now back, it was a pretty stupid decision because I'm half Serb, half Croat, but Sanja, she is complete Croat. So two of us, we were 3/4 Croats, 1/4 Serb, and we went to Serbia. And no much sense in that.
Yeah.
And when we got there, I realized, is this me or you?
Maybe, I don't know. Keep going. I'm tense.
When we got there, there was another problem. There was reputation in Serbia as well. And especially they would pick up, so it's me, huh? Thank you. They would pick up, especially people from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and send them back to frontline. And things would happen like military police would stop public bus in the city and, you know, stand on each door and just ask for documents. And every male between 16 and 60 with Bosnian papers would be taken straight to the truck and back to the front line. And back then, there were no mobile phones, no messaging, no social networks. You couldn't even let your family know where you are. Or you are sitting in coffee bar, and the military police comes, close the door, check everyone's documents. And also problem was you couldn't leave the country, because in order to leave country, you needed to have permission of military authorities. And it was problem. I was worried for Sanja. I was worried if they take me and send me back to frontline, she will stay alone. And she was 21 at that time. I was 23. And she didn't have anyone in Serbia. I had my father's relatives, and that's why we went there. They invited us, we went there, but she didn't have anyone. And Croat in Serbia during the war, I was really worried for her. So we decided to leave country completely. But the problem was how to go over border without permission. And money was not problem. I had money, and I had some relatives on Cyprus as well. So we decided we will try to go there. And Sanja said that I'm crazy and that they will take me at the airport. She doesn't want to go without me to Cyprus. So she said, you go first, and if you go through, I'll come after you. If they pick you up, I will try to go through Hungary, because you couldn't go directly anymore, to Croatia, back to my parents, and then we will get in touch somehow, hopefully, later. And that was time, it was maybe 10 days or so after we left my hometown, and that was time when I prayed second time in my life. So I was praying, God, now there was no anymore if you exist. So that first prayer made me agnostic out of atheist. I didn't know who God is, where he is, but I was thinking, well, it looks that there is something. And I was praying, God, help me to get out of this country and this war. So I went to the airport and came to policeman, you know, with the documents. He took my passport, he looked at it, and he asked, do you have permission of military authorities? I said no, and he was looking my passport for a few moments and then put stamp and show me that I can go. So that was second answer on my prayer, that for many years I didn't admit to anyone that I was even praying. You know, I was saying, oh, it was good man, good policeman. I was lucky because somehow back then I was thinking that, you know, strong man doesn't ask for favor even from God. And for me, it was sign of weakness if you pray. So I was not sharing that.
So what was the breakthrough for you then?
Well, it took few years. Through that few years, when everything was fine in my life, I would forget God completely. I would not think about God or anything. I didn't know anyone who is religious or any Christian who is really, really Christian. And there were a few occasions that big problems came into my life, that problems that were bigger than me, problems that I couldn't solve, and then I would remember God, and I would pray. And for example, first problem was again very soon. So first three prayers were close to each other. I got to Cyprus, but then Sanya couldn't come. I had relatives there. They guaranteed for me, Cyprus back then was not accepting refugees, so I could stay as visitor of my relatives, but she was not my wife. She was just my girlfriend. She couldn't come. And I also flew from Serbia with last airplane to Cyprus.
Wow.
After I landed, the resolution of United Nations came, and it was embargo on all air flights, and there were even rumors that UN will bomb Serbia. And that didn't happen in 92, it happened 7 years later, 99, during the conflict with Kosovo.
Right.
But there were, you know, not just rumors, it was in media a possibility of bombing. And I was so afraid for Sanya and what will happen with her, and I was praying every night to God that He will solve that situation and help that she can come to Cyprus. She left Serbia, she went to Macedonia, and God answered that prayer as well. It would be too long story to go through all details, but in less than a month, she was in Cyprus. Then during the war, then for a few months, everything was fine. And we were in touch with our families. We had in Mostar, our hometown, her parents, my sister and her family, my mother. And in Mostar, there were two parts of the war. In first part, Muslims or Bosniak and Croats were together against Serbs. Then Serbs retreated from the town, and after a few months, Bosniaks and Croats started to fight each other.
Right.
And that part of the war in Mostar was worse than first part. And we lost all communication with our families. And for a few months, we didn't know if they are alive. We would just watch on TV, distraction, dead people, and I was praying every night that God will save them. But in the meantime, when everything was fine, I would forget him. And then we got married on Cyprus, and Sanya stayed pregnant, and she delivered a girl, our daughter. She is now 22 years old. Her name is Jovana. And during delivery, doctors noticed that something is not as it should be. So they sent us to specialists for brain diseases. And that lady doctor, she was eminent. Is that English word?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure, probably is not then. She was recognized and well-known doctor with a lot of practice.
Yes, okay, eminent, yes.
So it is English word. Callum.
I'm American, sorry.
And she did visual and hand examination of Jovana. And she asked us to come to her office, and she said, I usually don't give diagnosis before, then I have all tests and results, but this is obvious. She is cool example. She is child with special needs. She will not be able to walk and don't expect much, and we were broken. She told us to do ultrasound of brain, EEG, blood tests, all different tests. She said, when you come with all tests, then we will decide on therapy, but don't expect much.
Wow.
And we were really broken, both of us. We left home, and then as many times before, or quite few times before, when I was desperate and I had problem which I couldn't solve, I prayed. But that time, it was little different, because always in the past, I would just list my needs to God, and also then I would give him some promises. I was thinking that with God is like with men. You know,
Right.
if you make me a favor, I have to make you a favor back. So I would say, God, help me with this, and I will quit smoking. Help me with this, and I will do something.
Sure.
And even God was answering my prayers, some my prayers. I never did part which I promised.
Okay.
And also I was looking for him only when I need him.
Yeah.
And never before I had sense that God is speaking something to me. It was always just me listing needs to him and expectations to solve them. But that time when I started to pray, it was a little different, and I had sense that God is speaking to me. I didn't hear a voice. It were more thoughts in my head. And what I hear, I didn't like, because I heard that I'm hypocrite, that I'm looking after him only when I need him, that I don't keep my promises, that I'm bad man, which I was, but I was not aware of that. So I was involved with organized crime, I was stealing, I was threatening people, I was putting gun in people's ribs, I was lying, and I was thinking that I'm good man. You know, I was comparing myself with the people who are worse than me. You know, I would say, well, I didn't kill anyone. Or, come on, I'm not dealing drug. Or I would find something, you know, that is something what I would think that is bad. I'm not that bad. I'm better. But during that prayer, I started to realize actually that I have a problem and that I am sinner. And that was, I would say, a crucial moment in my turning to faith and to Jesus. It took me another few years, and actually after that prayer, and even then, even my wife didn't know that I was praying ever.
Yeah.
And we did all checkups, and it was a bit stressful and hard. And with all papers, we went back to same doctor, and she looked, Jovana, she looked papers, and she invited us again to her office. And she said, we sit down, and she said, well, I don't know how to tell you this. And my wife started to cry, and, you know, we were thinking, what can be worse? And she said, no, no, please don't cry. This is good news. My diagnosis was wrong. And I don't see anything wrong with the baby. I was wrong. And in that moment, I jumped, and it was first time in my life that I admitted publicly that I was praying. I said, oh, I was praying. God healed her. And she gave me a look like I'm crazy. And she said, well, I'm atheist. I don't believe in God. It was my mistake. I have proof today that it was God's supernatural intervention, because Jovana has over 20 medals from international competitions in rhythmical gymnastics. And I say, she was supposed, you know, not even to walk.
Right.
And God does something, he does good job.
Wow.
But also, whenever I share my life story, and when I share this, I feel obligated to mention that God is not wishing well. You know, we have need, and we ask him, and he does, and that's it. You know, you come, you put coin in wishing well, and your wish comes true. God always answers our prayers, but answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. I know very dear Christian friends who are praying and who love God, and God loves them, and they have children with special needs. So we don't have a guarantee that when we become Christians that everything will be as we want it to be.
Right.
We have a guarantee that through all, even hardships and difficult situations, Jesus, God will be with us. And after I became Christian, I went through some very hard situations, and I was praying for deliverance, which didn't came in the form which I was expecting. You know Callum, but twice I had cancer. Both times was malignant cancer. First time I was diagnosed when I was 38, and that was age of my father when he died of cancer.
Right.
And his father died in late 30s of cancer. And I was pretty sure that that's it. You know, I'm dying. And I didn't have fear of future or what happens after I die, because I have assurance and security and promises in the Bible that I will spend eternity with the God in good place because of decisions which I made during my life. But I was very worried for my wife and children. And also through that time, God comforted me. And again, I think that I've heard him that he was telling me that he loves them more than I do, and that whatever happens, he is taking care of them. But I go through both cancers through some very hard therapies, and which was physically very hard for my body. I was praying for deliverance, and as I said, it didn't came in the form that I wanted, but just the fact that I'm sitting here today, 10 years later, is miracle itself.
It is amazing. Slavko, I could go on listening for another 4 hours, I think, but we do need to close up soon. So much to say. You also had, I think, during the surgery, one of your cancers, they accidentally cut your intestine and didn't notice, and you almost could have died with that. And
yeah. That was 2 years ago. It was not cancer-related. I was last diagnosed with cancer 7 years ago, so now I'm medically cancer-free.
Amazing.
But 2 years ago, as a consequence of second cancer, I had to have kidney removed, and then doctors made mistake.
So 20 years old, running 3 casinos, to now here, sharing your story, and you're a minister back in Bosnia. What I guess we've heard your story, but what difference has Jesus made for you? You're involved in the Mafia. You're a big, powerful guy. Why Jesus?
Yeah, well, difference is huge. First, thinking of where I would be today without Jesus. There are several possibilities. Mr. George ended up 1993, killed in Prague in underground garage, killed in front of his car, most probably by Russian Mafia, but the people who killed him were never caught. The boss, who was my immediate boss, just over me, he spent 10 years in prison. Also in Czech Republic, when we were started here and there and continued to work for George. And he spent 10 years in prison. He was convicted for murder. And I think if I haven't encountered Jesus, there is big possibility that I would end up one or the other way. I'm really thankful to God that through all of that, which I shared, and many more things, it's hard to say in half hour or 40 minutes all your life, but basically after Jovana was healed, I felt so thankful to God that I really then wanted to pay him back. And I started to hang around with some Christians. I got Bible, I was reading New Testament, and I wanted to live up to God's standards, as New Testament is teaching. And I was very disappointed. It would work for a few days, but then I would mess up. Some even small things. I would drive car, someone would cut my way, I would yell or speak bad words, or I would argue with my wife, and I would feel like I failed God. And I was very disappointed with myself, and I was even disappointed with the Bible. How can God ask us to live up to such high standards? It's impossible. And I was complaining to my Christian friends, and they told me, Slavko, it's not about what you do for God. It's about what Jesus did for you. I didn't really understand what they were talking about, but then they explained to me that Jesus came and died on the cross, that he is God himself, and that God loves us so much that he came to be one of us. God put himself into Mary's womb to be born as we are and to be similar to us, similar to Slavko, in everything but sin. He never committed sin. He was perfect. And then he went to the cross to pay punishment, to receive punishment, to pay price for my sins, because he loves me. And they said, it's about what Jesus did for you on the cross, not about what you do for him. All what you have to do, that's free gift. You have to accept that gift. Because it's free, it doesn't mean that it's cheap. Jesus gave his life for you. But what you have to do is to accept him as a Savior and Lord. And I did that also. It was not very clear to me what that means, Savior and Lord. They explained to me that Jesus came to save me from my sins, but also that his plan for my life is perfect. And that I have to come to the place where I will say, God, let your will be done in my life and not mine. And that was harder part of accepting Jesus. I like that part, Savior, but that part that someone is telling me what to do, I was struggling with that one. And if I didn't make that decision, I would not be in Bosnia and Herzegovina back today. I promised to my wife and to myself that we will never return. In my country, in average, every 50 years, there is war and conflict. My grandmother, that sister of my grandmother, which I mentioned at the beginning of the story, she died in the war at age 93. She had 5 wars or uprisings in her life. Too much for one human life. Oh. My mother had 3, and she died at 60 few years old. And we didn't want our children to grow up in that circumstances. So we promised to each other that we will never return. And then I accepted Jesus as a Savior and the Lord. I accepted that God's free gift of salvation, forgiveness of sins. But also I said, Lord, I will follow you. May your will be done in my life. And then soon after that, I started to feel that God wants me to go to Bosnia to tell to other people about his love, grace, mercy, forgiveness. And I was struggling with that. But if I didn't receive Jesus, I would not be in Bosnia.
And you wouldn't be in Southampton here right now.
I wouldn't be in Southampton. He gave me purpose for my life. My life is filled with joy. And that is joy regardless of circumstances. Everyone has joy at some moments in our lives, you know. But joy with Jesus gives it's joy regardless of circumstances. When I go through hard moments, there was some supernatural joy in my heart. I experienced forgiveness of sins. And not just that God forgave me sins. He forget. He is not mentioning them anymore. That's one of heaviest burdens on people's shoulders, sins, you know. When we do something wrong, our conscience doesn't let us free, but Jesus let us free. He forgave us. I experienced freedom. Before then I encountered Jesus, I didn't have choice. I had to sin. I had to lie. I had to steal. I had to cheat. Now I have choice. Jesus set me free. And I make wrong choice even today sometimes. And I make something which is not pleasing to God, but I know where to go. I go to cross. I said, Jesus, please forgive me, change me, help me not to do this anymore. And God is changing me. I'm different than I used to be. I'm not still perfect, but I'm changing into his image.
Amazing, amazing. Slavko, thank you so much. And you're willing to stick around for questions afterwards as well?
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for coming. And as Callum said, I will be around if you want to talk to me personally. I would be very happy to do that.
Let's give Slavko a round of applause. We're now going to take a 10-minute break. Please use the loo if you need to. Refresh your drinks, get some snacks. And then I'm going to just open up very briefly one of Slavko's favorite passages from the Bible, another story of a person changed by Jesus. I'll bring you back at 35 past.